So this is entitled a Fireside Chat. We're definitely going to chat. We don't have a fire. Hopefully, we won't have a fire.
Yeah, where's my wingback
Yeah.
chair? I need a
That's
big
right.
wingback chair and a coat. That's
Nick and I are just going to have a conversation, and we also invite you to participate as well, and we'll have opportunities for that. I thought I'd start off with a question or two for you, Nick, and then we can.
fire away.
Okay.
It'll be fun.
So we should start off with just a little definitional work, only because sometimes, believe it or not, people get confused about what we're actually discussing. So we'll start off with vendors and the definition of vendors in the context of risk management. So a vendor is.
So by definition, a vendor is someone that you're paying money to do a service for you, but the definition in this context is a lot broader.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at your phone as a for instance, this is something that really hits people directly. Every single app you have on that phone is a vendor that's servicing you, right?
That's right.
How many apps do you have on your phone, David?
Probably about 150.
There you go.
Yeah.
Every one of them
Yeah.
is a vendor,
Yeah.
including the phone itself, including the phone service
That's
provider.
right. And sometimes aren't they referred to as third parties as well?
Yeah, that's really the main piece of this is that it's other than you
Okay.
that has access to data or information or whatever about you that they're using to provide a service for you.
And why is there risk associated with them? We heard in the introduction to us that over 60% of cybersecurity breaches come from vendors. So tell us a little bit about why that is.
So I'm gonna turn this around and ask you a question related
That's
to this.
fine.
So how many vendors do you think the average company has contracts with globally today? Just on average, how many vendors?
It's got to be over 100.
Right, so it's a little bit higher.
Okay.
The number in 2019 was 588
Wow.
on average.
That's a lot.
Now, how many of those 588 vendors do you think have access to that company's data or the customer's data that the company is servicing?
I would think it would be more than half.
You're exactly right. It's about 288
Okay.
on average.
Okay.
So when you're talking about the context of the risk management and third parties and all of that that's related to that, the people that are interacting with those, it's us, right?
Yeah.
The customers of those companies actually have their personal information with those 288 vendors. So it goes all the way through the chain from the person who's the customer, all the way through to that vendor, and all the way through to the vendors that vendor uses. So it goes all the way past the direct relationship to the relationships beyond.
Interesting. Yeah, so by the way, Nick and I did not rehearse any of this, so if I'm getting the answers correct, it's pure luck.
It's experience.
That too. So tell us a little bit more about what is it that, what is vendor risk management? What does that mean?
Right, so David, you've led a lot of teams of people, and you've started companies and you've run companies. So when you engage with a service provider or a vendor, right, what does that process look like just to begin with, right? So initially you're looking at them and saying they have a service you need, but then you engage with them.
It depends.
Yeah.
So, and I'll use some of the places I've worked and led as an example. So if it's a small company like a startup, it's fairly quick. It's, we need this, whatever it is, whatever they're offering. We usually try to make sure that the requirements, what we're trying to do, and what the vendor is capable of doing, and what the price and the price is right. Then we say okay, and it can be as simple as that. That's the extent of the vetting. In a larger company, so for example, I've worked in companies that were in financial services, which were highly regulated. There was a process which sometimes can be very onerous, where you have to have the vendor complete a questionnaire, and they have to be detailed about their ability to protect our information, etc. And that can take a long time. In fact, Nick and I worked both. That's where we met. We worked in a small business bank, and their process was overly lengthy, partly because they got in trouble for not having one for a while. So I think it varies, but it's a really important question, because now that I think about it, it's all over the place.
guess my point in asking that is that the decision-making process that you're going through to pick that vendor involves some risk assessment, right? Are they going to satisfy your needs? Are they too expensive? Are they going to be around tomorrow? There's risks that are there. But those things are usually vetted through a contractual agreement, right? They have a, your SLAs and your payment terms and all of that. But frequently, the part that's missed is the security component. So is there any contract that you've ever read? Actually, I can tell you what they are. I'm going to ask you if you've seen this because it's something all of us do every day. Are there any contracts that you've engaged with that specifically talk about protecting your information or anything about your information at all?
A couple of them that I can recall were very explicit about making sure that in a couple of cases, the company I worked for had to explicitly agree to the fact that we would not have access to the personal information of their customers, right? So that was one. The other one was one that said if anyone on my company were to have access to that information or sensitive company data, that there would be another layer of vetting, if you will. In other words, that agreement did not cover the ability to get access to sort of a measure to say, but it was the honor system that said if you for any reason are going to get access to something that had a list of these items that are proprietary or confidential, you then had to go through this vetting process, and there would be a separate agreement. But I found it very interesting that seemed more like they were just checking a box to put it in the contract, because at no time did anybody ever ask me or members of our team, well, we're going to give you access to something, now you're going to have to sign this contract. And that never happened.
Right, and that's common.
Yes, it is.
And that's very common, especially in the commercial space. When we're talking about fintechs or highly regulated industries, they have mandated third-party risk management processes. But even those usually are just going through and checking off a compliance box. They're just trying to get the rules right so that they can continue to operate. But in the end, what a lot of us do, and we do it on our phone as well, I always like to drive it down to a personal thing. When you go in and you launch an app, it always says, this is our user agreement. And this is what we're going to do with your data, and by clicking this, you're saying yes to letting us have access to your data. And that's really as far as we normally go when we look at any vendor that we're interacting with. They say they're going to do the right thing, and we just trust them, and it's the honor system, like you said. So the thing that's really important in risk is there is the component of risk in contractual arrangements that you want to address the business risk, the financial, the reputational, the SLAs and all of that. But the cybersecurity risk is so important and so critical because, David, how much money, okay, now here's where it hits the road, right?
Yep.
How much money do you believe, on average, third-party data security risk breaches have incurred to companies in 2024, the on-average expense?
So the cost of the expense of that.
Right, the expense of the breach.
The breach.
Remediating it, solving it, whatever it was.
I'm going to guess and say it's over $1 million, but I have no idea how much.
So in 2024, it was $4.7 million average.
Wow.
For a single breach.
For a single breach,
right?
yeah.
And there's some customers that have had multiple breaches.
Yeah.
And really, what happens in almost all of those scenarios is they don't have a robust enough third-party risk assessment program for cybersecurity. And so they miss the pieces that are gaps in the vendor security structure.
So what is, thank you, that's very interesting, and I figured it was a high number. Having worked in companies that had or didn't have any vendor risk management, either it was sort of the range of onerous, difficult, can't get a vendor approved for months versus all I have to do is get out my company credit card and buy the service. How do you determine how restrictive, or maybe restrictive is not the right word, how comprehensive of a vendor management program should you have, given our vendor risk management program, given that there are companies all across the spectrum, right? You've got startups that are 4 people, you have companies that have thousands of people. What's your thought there?
So this is a really interesting part of the conversation because there is no one size fits all.
Right.
So for me, quite honestly, the main thing that you want to focus on is the risk appetite that you're willing to accept for the different elements that the vendor is engaging with. Like, as a for instance, if I'm engaging with a vendor and all they're going to do is build a website for me and throw a bunch of static images up there and put some text and make sure that it's maintained and is functioning on a regular basis, I'm not going to worry so much about assessing that vendor for the risk that they might have. Now, if that vendor is integrating with data in the company or they have access to customer information, then I'm going to start digging a lot deeper into their security practices to make sure that whatever they're doing is going to align with what my risk posture, my risk appetite is.
Got it. How do you make sure? So let's assume that you're a company that has this is a mid-sized company and you have maybe 50 people or 100 people or whatever, and you're doing great, and yet your website and other vendors you have do have limited access to customer data or other information. So it's not just static, web pages, for example, and photos. Um, how do you know? How do you know which vendors to go to be more stringent about beyond what you just said? So, for example, um, let's say we have a couple of typical tools that we all use, some Microsoft tools or some tools from a CRM like HubSpot.
Right.
How do you vet? Because most people like I would assume, oh, it's Microsoft. Services everybody.
Right.
They don't have any problems. Why would we even bother asking them questions or understanding what vendor risk management looks like? So what does it look like when you're talking about vendors of different sizes, types, and capabilities?
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. When you look at companies like Microsoft, they won't even answer your questions,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They've got their security assurance website and they do public press releases on all of those things. But in the end, here's the thing that people need to understand, I guess, is that say you're a company. Okay,
Right.
this is the scenario. You're a company. You've got 1 million customers that are stored in HubSpot, and let's say that HubSpot has a security breach,
Mm-hmm.
and all of the personal information and account information for all those customers is released into the wild.
Okay.
Whose fault is that? Is it your fault as the company, or is it HubSpot's fault?
I'm going to guess and say it's my fault as the
It's
company.
your fault,
Yeah.
right?
Even though it doesn't sound like it should be.
That's the unequal justice that exists in the legal system today. So the way that it's looked at is that as a company, if you're using that service, you're responsible for making sure that that service protects your customers,
Yeah.
right? So you're the one that has the data that's putting it there. You have to do the due diligence necessary
Yeah.
to protect it. Now, larger companies frequently, when breaches like that happen, they will turn around and try to get some recompense from the vendor.
Okay.
But those types of activity is usually very costly and onerous all by itself, when all they could have done is had a third-party risk management program to
Yeah.
protect them from the risks.
Well, that's actually a good segue, and thank you. That's a good segue into the next question I have for you, which is, what can companies do? And let's take examples. Let's take some mid-sized companies to smaller companies. Where do they start? How do they? We know what bad looks like, right? Which is just take out your credit
Right.
card and buy something. but beyond that, where would you recommend they begin to think about how to minimally protect themselves?
Right. So I think the first place to start is to know yourself, right? What are the risks that you're willing to accept? Because you have to accept some in order to be a business. There's always risk involved in making money. There's risk involved in approaching any kind of contract or relationship. So it's important to know yourself and what risk you're willing to accept. Now, if you've got a very, very low risk appetite, because of that, your risk management program will be fairly extensive because you've got to cover all the things that you see in your business environment that you believe are risks, cybersecurity or otherwise. But if your risk appetite is very high, then your program will probably be small. So you got to kind of analyze yourself first. And then the next thing is just get a comprehensive inventory of all of your vendors. There's so few companies today that actually even know all of the vendors and all of the contracts and services and relationships that they have outside of themselves. And once you have those two things together, you can begin to take steps to ensure that your customers and your data are kept more secure with those third parties.
I'm glad you said that. We have a couple of stories that I think I'd like to share, and maybe you have some that you'd like to share as well. When you talk about companies that don't know how many vendors they have, that resonates a lot with me. And the reason I say that is we had a couple of instances in the last few years where a client asked us to evaluate the applications they use. So they weren't talking about vendor risk management at all. All they were talking about was, we know that the marketing department and these other departments are buying software, but we don't have any visibility into it. And we might have duplicative purchases in different parts of the company. And obviously, this was a larger company. And so when we asked them, well, how many software vendors or vendors in general do you have? They said somewhere between 1,000 and 3,000. We were shocked. It's like,
That's a little bit above
that's
average.
that's a lot. That's a lot, and a lot that you don't know. And so, so I think that really your first point about making sure that you take an inventory of your vendors is really critical. Tell us a story about what you consider one of the more, so maybe two stories. One of the better examples of a company that did it well, and why they did it well, and if they had to learn from a hack to be able to do it.
Right.
And then maybe a horror story of someone who didn't, and if you have any of those stories you can pull out. Obviously, keeping the names confidential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, oh my gosh, there's so many stories. So I'm trying to pick a good one. So I think let's start with a group that did it well after going through the pain of having to learn what not doing it well entailed. So, and this was not directly related to again third-party risk management, but they began to dive into that because they realized the gap that was there. And this happened after a breach that was pretty significant, brought them down to their knees. And so they were absolutely required to go through and make sure that all of the data that they were responsible for and all of the applications and all of the services that they used were was safe, and that it had reduced risk. And that exercise helped them to build a really clear inventory. And coming out of it, it actually wound up saving them money in the long run because there was a lot of licenses they didn't use, a lot of services they didn't need, a lot of, like you had mentioned, duplication. They had multiple endpoint protection products, all with different monitoring and control systems in them and different versions of the software. And because of this, they standardized on a single platform and reduced the cost, and thereby reducing the risk, right? The less complexity you have, the less risk you have. So the KISS principle is always there. Keep it simple. So let's tell.
Now you're going to tell the horror story. Scare everybody.
Right. So the horror story that always comes to mind is kind of the grandfather of all of these, and it's not one I was directly related to, but it's the Target breach. If you remember, that was big in the news a while ago. And the interesting thing about it is that it was very definitely a cybersecurity breach, but the breach didn't come through a traditional method. It came through the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning vendor who happened to have an ID access card that didn't get disabled properly. And so the hacker was able to break into the ID access card system, which was then connected to all of the point of sale systems, and they were able to get all of the customers' data from Target. And as IT folks, we always have a lot of focus on software and on cloud services and all of the digital products that are out there, but we have to also have a clear eye on the physical vendors too. The guy who sweeps your floor, it's important to know what his background is if you have a risk in that area. The person who cleans your HVAC is another good example that Target had to deal with. So it's really interesting. The horror stories, there's hundreds of them, and it's just there's a big gap in security now for third-party risk management.
Yeah, that sounds scary, and I'm glad I wasn't working at Target at
Yeah.
that time. So we are a bit of the ways through our talk here, and while we've shared a lot of information, if there are any questions from anyone or any things anyone would like to ask or share, that would be fine with us too. We can continue on. Anybody in the audience? I know we've just got a handful of people here. Okay.
I'd like to just see a show of hands. I'm going to ask you guys a quick question here, and I don't want to make this painful, but I was just curious, in your companies that you work in today, are you aware of any third-party risk management programs that your companies use? Do you have one? No.
Yeah. It's what's that? Okay. 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 Good.
Okay.
When we tell people that, when you hear the data that you heard when we were introduced, that over 60% of cybersecurity breaches are a result of vendors, most people don't know that. They don't even think of that actually. So it always is a surprise to share that data point. And as a result, because even when there's a security breach in the news, they don't necessarily, they do sometimes. Like with the
Very
SolarWinds hack, they talked about a
Right.
third-party vendor. I don't know if you want to talk about that hack a little bit, but um, they don't usually say it was a third party or it was a vendor that caused the problem, and there are good reasons for that. But go ahead. Do you have anything to add
Yeah,
about
no,
that?
I think that the times when they blame it on a vendor,
Yeah.
it's when the government is impacted.
Okay.
When it's a private entity, they have the legal responsibility for the breach, so they're the ones that make it in the news. That's why I call it the target hack. Right? That's why everybody calls it the target hack.
Right.
You don't realize that the ID card system that they purchased had a vulnerability that allowed the hacker to get in, right? So it's always the perspective of where the legal weight and responsibility lie, but in the end, it does impact the reputation of these companies, and now there's some rules that have been released both at the state and the federal level that require disclosure of these types of breaches and the cause, and whether or not, what the remediation was to resolve it. So the truth about the breaches are starting to come out, where the real responsibilities tend to lie.
That's good. So I have a question for everybody. Raise your hand if you've ever taken a cybersecurity training class online. Okay. So, given that response, why doesn't cybersecurity training, or does it? Why or why not does it help with vendor risk management?
So I think so. It's interesting because in the CISSP handbook and the training for that, that's kind of the granddaddy of information security certifications. They mention third-party risk once in the entire body of knowledge,
Wow.
but they focus on core principles:
Okay.
confidentiality, integrity, availability. And third-party risk, they mention it just in the context of the overall risk that can be, imposed on a organization with a lack of cybersecurity practices. So it's almost like it's like an evil stepchild in the corner that no one wants to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing that I think is interesting because there's a perception that the cybersecurity bad people are out here, but they're not necessarily associated with any vendors. They're just, in other places or other locations, and they are looking for one thing and one thing only, and that is money. But that raises an interesting question. Do you think that when a vendor is responsible for a cybersecurity breach at a company, that they are responsible, that they understand their level of responsibility when so given that more than 60% of all cybersecurity breaches are from vendors, do you think they know that many vendors know that, or is that not the case?
No, I think they definitely know it. And when you read the indemnity clauses in their contracts,
Yeah.
they make sure that you know it's your problem. And they do that for legal reasons, and there's reasons behind it. And it's not something that's really I'm trying to disparage, but
Yeah.
it's really just that when you're like if you ever go to purchase services from Amazon, as for instance, they have their security assurance statements, and they have the due diligence and care and instruction on what you should do to set up their environment as securely as possible. But breaches still happen. As because this is a long explanation, but because Amazon is such a complex environment, you can do so much there. It's very easy for you as a user to configure it to be at a place of lacking security or increased risk.
Interesting.
But when Amazon, in their infrastructure, in their system, designs something that opens up risk to you in the way the contractual obligation reads, that's still something that you have to take responsibility for.
So when you think that's really interesting, I did not realize that they all have that in their indemnity. I mean, I think I've seen it before when we've looked at contracts, but I haven't put two and two together. So the question then in my mind is um, if the onus is on the company to protect itself from vendors who may not have very good information security practices, how do you just say, okay, well, these three vendors don't have any good, so I'm not going to use them? I know that's dependent on a lot of factors.
As a security guy, that sounds like a great
I'm
idea.
sure
but
it does.
That doesn't
Yeah.
work for business.
I understand. Or what kind of influence do you have over those vendors that, how do you because obviously, if you're not working at that company, you can't say, okay, you need to put in place firewalls here and do all this other
Right.
stuff. What do you recommend?
So the point of a third-party risk management program isn't to impose your will on your vendor's security operations. It's to identify the gaps that exist in their practices so that you can implement remediation on your own to protect the data. So, a basic example is encryption. If you have, say, a massive database of customers that's sitting up in an Amazon cloud database, don't store the data there in its native format. Encrypt it before you store it there. That's a really basic example, but there's a lot of security controls that you can apply to your environment and to the configuration of whatever environment or software you're using to fill whatever security gaps you might identify in a third-party risk management scenario.
Do you believe that security, information security, or cybersecurity breaches caused by vendors is likely to increase for a long time, or do you feel like it's going to get better?
Well, the trend has been continually increasing, so I'm going to go with the data.
Yeah.
Continually more expensive, continuing increasing, and the reason for this is because the people that are on the other side of the fence are much better funded, much better staffed, and much more persistent in the goal that they're trying to achieve as opposed to the security folks who are understaffed and struggling with the process.
Yeah, and I'm gonna give an example that you and I both know about. Obviously, keeping it confidential. I wasn't particularly aware. We had a client who had a breach in the last year, and I wasn't particularly aware of just how sophisticated these hackers are until you showed me a link to their website, and it looked like a regular business. I mean, you literally would, if you didn't know that it was a business and all they did was breach other companies, you would think they were selling something. I mean, they had, all these links and, hey, we need some people here. They were recruiting people. I mean, it was just unbelievable. So don't think that that was a big aha moment for me. Don't think that
Yeah.
those folks are, just kind of somebody in a bedroom, right?
Right, and in the real-time communications that we had with the threat actor during that breach, they called themselves a business. They said, don't treat us badly. We're a business. We're trying to make money here. And I'm like, no, you're a criminal. What's wrong with you?
Exactly. Well, and it's sort of it's a little reminiscent to me of the mob, right? Because you don't think of
Exactly.
the mob as somebody sitting in a basement somewhere. You think of them as having what look like legitimate businesses,
Right.
and it's a front for actually nefarious activity. So that was a really big deal for me. Is that something that is consistently happening? Do you think that these are becoming companies, or is this more predominantly individual bad actors?
No, it's all over the map. So there's state-sponsored actors. There's individuals that are selling, like, again, in this particular scenario, there's an individual who didn't actually take any data, but they sold the backdoor access that they were able to achieve to the actual ransomware threat actor. So the ransomware threat actor has the tool to do the encryption and the collection of data, but they couldn't get in the back door. So there's another guy who's sitting in his basement who happened to stand up a backdoor access mechanism for this client, and he sold that backdoor access to the ransomware actor. So it was like a
It's
third-party
like a
arrangement
deal.
in that
Yeah.
scenario.
Oh my gosh. So what are the most common ways that vendors fail their clients and allow for access to companies? Are there? I mean, I've heard. We know what ransomware is,
Right.
obviously, right? That someone breaches it, takes control of your environment, and then says, or either they suck everything out. It's called exfiltrated. Is that the right word?
Right.
They exfiltrate all the data, all the documents, and then they say, we're going to make them public unless you pay us this much money. Um, but and I don't know how that seems to me like the thing that gets in the news more lately, but I don't know how common that is. What are the more common things that maybe happen behind the scenes that we don't hear that you're aware of?
Well, again, it is kind of all over the map. So really, the goal, it depends on the goal of the threat actor.
Okay.
Um, so, for instance, state-sponsored actors that are, they're called APTs, Advanced Persistent Threats. The government gives them numbers and classifies them on their characteristics, and they do attacks that really have no, financial gain in the end.
Right.
They're just trying to get, it's a military operation, is what it is. It's one state attacking another. On the other side, there's so many different ways that the people in the commercial space are attempting to break into different environments. So it's, they still do to this day, even with the advent of two-factor authentication, brute force password cracking, which is from 20 years ago.
Yeah.
But all of the old tools are still good friends for these guys, so they keep on doing the same things. They have, flooded attacks on networks. They have there's lots of attacks that are happening in websites and cross-site scripting. So one thing that was new to me that I just learned a little while ago is an attack that's called SEO poisoning.
Okay.
So what they'll do is they'll take a popular agency, they'll put up a website that has a URL that's relatively similar to that agency's website, and then they'll gather all of that agency's data and start pumping it into the Google search engine so that when you search for anything related to that agency,
You go
it goes to the
them
fake
instead.
URL instead of the real one. And then the fake URL looks just like that agency's website, but it's got nefarious JavaScript loaded on it that'll either take over and compromise your machine or exfiltrate your data or any of a number of things. So that was
And the only way that you'd know that there was anything wrong is if you looked at the URL and you noticed that it wasn't exactly the same.
yeah, it'll have like one letter off.
Yes, yeah. And that's where it really gets tough, I think, for people.
Yeah, there was one group a while ago, this was quite a while ago, but they created a domain that was GOOGL.com.
Oh, wow.
Google.com.
Yeah.
So a lot of these larger companies now are learning how to protect against that just by registering those domains that are roughly similar to theirs. But it's still a pretty nefarious attack when you've got an agency that's like an educational university who doesn't have the resources to do the research and protect themselves. And somebody just adds one letter to the URL and then does SEO poisoning, and they own all of their clients.
Wow. Interesting. Well, let's open it up for another opportunity for questions. Any questions from anybody? Anything that you have heard or wanted to hear about that you have questions about? Yes.
We've been trying to tell people.
Go ahead. Please ask your question.
Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I can say one thing about that. It is hard to get people to think about spending money on this, right? Because with all the other priorities that companies have, you don't want to. You feel as though, well, it's never going to happen to me, right? So it's a little bit like until you've experienced it, you don't know how awful it can actually be, but you don't want to experience it. One way that you can do it is if you have, depending on the number of vendors you have, a number of contracts you have, what typically happens with vendor contracts, not always, but often, is that companies sign an agreement. It could be just a click-through agreement for software. It could be a person coming to clean the offices, as Nick mentioned, a janitor, and sort of forget about it. And what that usually means is that over time there might be automatic renewal periods. You might not be getting the best financial deal, if you will, out of those contracts that you can. And so what we found in a few instances was we were able to basically encourage a company to start to put together a vendor risk management program, which does have a cost associated with it, and fund it by helping to renegotiate their commercial contract agreements and saving them money so that they're not actually out of pocket any more money than they were before. And so that's one way to do it, but I think there are some simpler ways that Nick can describe.
Yeah, I think just at a really practical front lines perspective, if you want to start out, just ask them for their security policy, whatever vendor it is that you're talking to. But usually that reads like it's like an encyclopedia of information with a lot of jargon and information in it that you might not be aware of. So it's really good to have a security professional look it over. And then that person will just have a lot more questions, I'm sure, to dig in deeper on that vendor security
The
policy.
first sign is if they don't have an security
They don't have
policy,
one,
then it's
yeah.
a problem.
They've
There
got
was
a big problem.
thank you very much for the question. There was a question here as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Just one character, yeah. stakes to come in with some type of endpoint protection software. And I don't mean just antivirus, right? So most of the enterprise endpoint protection systems today will it'll actually look at all of your website traffic, it'll protect your JavaScript engine in your browser and keep those capabilities from being executed. And most of them today, all of the tier 1 or tier 2 providers like this, they keep a list of all of the bad domains, and they're looking for them all the time. So if you inadvertently visit one of these, your endpoint protection software will not allow you to get there. It'll stop you before you do the breach. But the hackers, like I said, they're a lot better staffed and a lot more resourced. So there's always new domains that are getting produced and always new engines for SEO poisoning and other attacks that are happening. So it's never 100% certain, but that's the table stakes. Get really good endpoint protection software both for yourself and your personal use, and then make sure if you're running a company that they do the same thing.
Good advice. Thank you for that question. Other questions or comments? Has anyone here experienced a cybersecurity breach in their company? Has anyone? Oh, yes, go ahead. Okay, got it. Thank you for that. It's a scary world out there, and yet I think if you take some precautions and you even do a little bit, right, it's common sense. And more of it, most of it's like a lot of things, right? The awareness is half the battle. If you don't even know it's a potential problem, then you have absolutely no chance of preventing something bad from happening. Then the question, though, is what are the few things that you can do? Let's say you have no vendor risk management program, which most companies do not. What are the few things, and you mentioned one of them, asking for security policy. There's some other things that they can do to help themselves in the interim.
Yeah, so I think there's another great resource is to just sign up to newsletters and other security information sites that help you to know what breaches have happened and vulnerabilities that exist on a regular basis, just so you can be aware. There's a lot of them, and it can be a lot of noise at some points in time, but it's always good to keep abreast of that. I think too, at the risk of sounding self-serving, this is a very complex question, and it's very difficult to just kind of bootstrap yourself up alone without professional help. So it's important to get someone who definitely understands security to help you when you're interested in making sure that your company can be secure. I also think it's really important at a base level to just to borrow from your keynote, think critically.
Yeah, yeah.
Think it through. Think around the corners. Think about the pieces that exist in the engagement that you have with the vendor that either pop up a red flag for you and cause you concerns, and then address those.
It's good advice, and it is, I think for us as consumers also, as independent from companies, there's a bit of nervousness as well, right? As we just said, you don't have to be working in a company with your computer from your company or your device from your company to go to the wrong website, as this gentleman just said about the Canadian bank, right? It can affect all of us, and you just have to be vigilant about it. So any parting words of wisdom that you have for everyone? We're at a time, just about a time here.
Yeah, just really quickly, one question that came up a while ago is how do we start in small ways to help to manage our third parties effectively? And the thing that's happening now, especially in the European Union and in other nations outside of the U.S., is that we're getting to a point where we don't have a choice anymore. They're mandating the requirement to have this.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually what's going to happen, especially for larger companies, is they're either going to have a full-blown third-party risk management program or they're going to get a fine.
Okay.
And it's become such a problem because 60% of the breaches that have happened because with third party. It's become such a problem that it's becoming law. It's becoming mandated.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to give you one last question, which I know we always get this question about a lot of things: is can AI do this? Can AI in and of itself protect you from vendors in a vendor risk management program kind of way?
It can help a lot.
Okay.
It can also, it's the funny thing about the most secure computer in the world is the one that's unplugged from the wall. So you can program AI to completely lock down your access to any vendors at all. That's just
Right.
not possible.
Right.
But it can definitely
Wonderful. Any other questions before we've got a couple minutes left? No? Well, okay, we'll give you all back
Yeah, thank
3
you all
minutes
for
of
your
time.
time.
Thank you for your time.